everyone, this is Dan, the GM from What the Dice, and you are listening to Tale of the Manticore.
The following podcast is intended for a mature audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome back to Tale of the Manticore, Season 3. Like the creature from which it takes its name, Tale of the Manticore is a mashup, a crossbreeding between two different species of storytelling. Here you will find the unpredictability of old-school paper and dice games with the storycraft of a dark fantasy novel. No character is sacred, and none will be spared if the dice decide their fate is at hand. According to lore, the tail of a manticore is barbed with cruel iron spikes. There will be much pain in the days ahead. Last time on Tale of the Manticore. In Chapter 14, having passed through Black Cloud territory, the party continues its journey to the north in search of Audok. They are beginning to run low on food and water, but Cord uses magic to locate a raspberry bush. While this temporarily solves one problem, it unfortunately leads to another. The raspberry bush turns out to be the home of a family of sprites, and they do not appreciate having it ransacked by a group of hungry demi-humans. Making things worse, Tentir accidentally swats one of them, having mistaken it for a bug. The sprite's leader declares that Tentir must be punished and demands that the party make restitution for his affront. By way of punishment, the sprites cast a minor curse on the young elf, which will forever make raspberries taste like rotten fish. As for the restitution, they demand that the party turns over their salt. This is confusing to the PCs, who don't realize they're carrying any, until Achillea is made to empty her bag. That's when the gift from the wizard Fim, completely forgotten at the bottom of her bag until now, falls out. Fim's gift is, of course, a small quantity of exotic salt. As it is the way of fairy folk to offer a wager when meeting strangers, the companions find themselves risking some of their gold coins against the chance to learn where they can find water. The sprites then ask a riddle, and Dureni thinks he knows the answer. Chapter 15. Part 1. Day 14. Afternoon. Mythic event meaning: assist the innocent. Party status: Achillea, 7 out of 7 hit points. Cord, 3 out of 11. Dureni, 9 out of 9. Tentir, 6 out of 6. Supplies: the companions have 5 portions of food and no water. Spells available: Achillea has memorized Shrink and Message. Cord can cast Entangle.
What is something that grows smaller? The more you share it.
The solution to the riddle suddenly came to Dureni.
I know the answer,
he said.
Speak then, but answer with care, for you only have one guess.
One guess is all I need.
We shall see. Speak, elf.
The thing that grows smaller the more you share it is a secret.
The sprites exploded in a frenzy of helter-skelter flight. They buzzed and chittered to each other, possibly in frustration, possibly in celebration. It was hard to tell until they finally calmed, and their leader, beaming and grinning, declared,
You have the right of it, elf. Well guessed. The answer is indeed a secret, and for that we shall give you a secret in addition to that which we promised.
The other fairies erupted into boisterous applause, clapping their tiny hands madly and flipping their bodies in the air.
You shall find a river in that direction,
He told them, pointing off to the northwest.
I cannot say for certain how fast your legs will take you there, but I should think you could arrive by nightfall if you hurry. And as for the secret, which I offer for free, you should know that there is an item of powerful magic located in the ruins on the river's far side. A wizarding stick.
Here, some of the other fairies brought their little hands up to their mouths, as if to conceal smiles. A titter of laughter rippled through them.
Of course, such a thing is of no use to us, but perhaps it would be a great boon to you.
The companions thanked the sprites, and, taking their leave, circumnavigated their patch of raspberry bushes and went in the direction they'd been shown. They traveled in single file, as they always did, and one by one, the hours passed. The terrain became less hilly and gave way eventually to plains of tall grass, yellowed by the summer sun. Purple thistles poked through, and insects buzzed around them as they walked. By mid-afternoon, the clouds had somewhat dispersed, and a weak diffusion of sunlight filtered through them. The party stopped to rest only once, eager to reach the river by nightfall, and they almost succeeded. The fairies, who flew rather than walked, had overestimated their overland speed. It was 2 hours past sundown when they heard the sound of flowing water coming from up ahead. If they hadn't been so thirsty, they might have decided to make camp some distance away from the river. Both Durrani and Tentir knew as a matter of common sense that a riverside was not a wise place to make camp. Rivers drew animals and all manner of other creatures besides. But they had been without water for a full day of travel, and the decision to risk it was unanimous. So they pushed on, and finally, by the light of the half-moon shining overhead, they came to the curving silver shape of the river. Here they found a suitable spot to make camp for the night under a weeping willow, and, with Cord keeping vigil, Achillea, Durrani, and Tentir laid out their bedrolls, and, as they were all exhausted by the day's journey, quickly fell asleep. I need to make some hex crawl rolls for the PCs. Just the basics are required. For tomorrow's weather, a 5. I think that a light rain begins in the night and will continue to drizzle on and off all the next day. Next is the roll for stumble upon. A 16 means nothing out of the ordinary happens. That said, this part of the world contains a special set-piece scenario. When the party follows the river upstream, as they're certain to do since it will take them in their intended direction, they will eventually come within sight of the place the leader of the sprites told them about. These ruins, and there isn't much left of them, mark the original home of the Caymores. More on the Caymores as we go, but for now I still need to make a roll for wandering encounters. And since I have mentioned that camping riverside is somewhat more dangerous than choosing a spot farther off, I'll represent that by increasing the chance of having such an encounter. A 4 to 6 on a d6 means they will. Here's the roll. I got a 1. Finally, the PCs can spend a day without running into something weird or unpleasant. She was dreaming again. This, at least she understood. The rest was confusing. At first, she thought she was standing face to face with the boy from her dream of the previous night. But when he mimicked her movements so precisely, and as her environs coalesced around her from whatever miasmic stuff dreams are made from, she realized that she was standing in front of a huge looking glass, and that the person in front of her was her, or she was him. Once again, her reflected image showed her an identity that was not her own. She was intrigued that her dreams should have such continuity, for the face in the mirror was the same face she had seen in the pond, though it was less frightened looking now. According to the looking glass, she was clothed in rich garments, a black doublet slashed at the sleeves to reveal a green silken shirt underneath. Her hair was a wavy light brown, parted in the middle and cut straight at the jawline. A gold medallion hung around her neck. Suddenly, and unable to control it, she found herself talking.
Can you help me get home?
She heard and felt herself say it, though her voice was not her own.
I just want to go home.
She said again.
I just want to sleep.
She realized that not only could she not control her own voice, but she could take no action at all of her own free will. She was merely a passenger in this boy's body, looking through his eyes and hearing through his ears. She was in some kind of room. There were symbols on the wall made from beaten copper. They showed stylized versions of the sun. There was a window of leaded stained glass, placed high on one wall over a set of double doors. It too showed a sun, with chunky, yellow wavy lines radiating out from a circle of red, but no light brightened the colored glass. It was dark, but for the light of a candle that she held. The air felt cold and damp. Unable to control her movements, she found herself walking out of the small room and passing through a pair of double doors. Outside, it was night. She was in a long courtyard, flanked by columns and ending in a portico of ghostly white stone. The open sky above was the color of iron. With purpose, her steps took her across the yard, under the portico, into a single door decorated in carved filigree. Her hand came up and took the handle. Still with no agency of her own, she opened the door and stepped through it. A short corridor led to an opulent throne room, and Achillea realized that she was in a castle. She had only ever heard about castles from Aldvay's stories. Presently, she felt like she was a part of one of his stories. It was quiet. There were no other people around, only a raised dais upon which stood 2 lonesome thrones of wood. A different tapestry hung from each wall, showing some royal personage or other, and a small table between the thrones held a pair of polished silver goblets. The reflection of her candle flame gleamed and bent across them. She walked up the steps of the dais, and once again she heard the boy's voice, while her own mouth worked like a puppet's mouth.
I can't find it. It should be right here.
She looked down. There was a sun symbol etched into the stone floor.
It should be right here.
Repeated the voice in frustration. The hand that was not her own then reached forward and picked up one of the silver goblets. Holding it aloft, she caught her reflection, but this time it was her own face that she saw, her own amber eyes and platinum hair in the image, distorted and stretched by the polished curvature of the silver goblet. When the voice spoke again, she could hear it, but in her reflection, her mouth did not move.
Can I tell you a secret?
It asked in a voice so low it was almost a whisper. Achillea wanted to reply. She willed herself to reply, but she had no voice, and her image remained static.
I'll tell it to you if you promise to believe me.
Achillea woke up. Chapter 15. Part 2. Day 15. Pre-dawn. Mythic event meaning. Assist the innocent. Party status. Achillea, 7 out of 7 hit points. Cord, 4 of 11, having regained 1 hit point through natural healing. Dureni, 9 of 9. Tentir, 6 of 6. Supplies. The companions have 2 portions of food and 21 of water. Spells available. Achillea has memorized Shrink and Message. Cord can cast Entangle. None of the companions slept very well that night, for partway through, a light but cold rain began to fall, and the willow provided poor shelter. The rain came in fits and starts, and it was during one of these short showers that Achillea was woken from her dream of the boy in fine clothes. After that, she found it was impossible to get back to sleep, so she stayed up with Cord, whispering idle thoughts to him for a time, and then, later, while the stars and moon shone through the clouds overhead, she tested out ideas for a 3rd stanza to the poem she was working on. While happy with the 1st and 2nd, the 3rd had thus far eluded her. She wanted it to say something, be something more than just an ode to natural beauty. But no inspiration came, just more rain, and eventually, the sunrise. The cloud cover made it a gorgeous sight. To begin, a soft pink glow suffused the air, preceding the appearance of the red ball of the sun. But even this spectacle evoked no suitable words. Eventually, Achillea gave up trying and just enjoyed the view. When the rain abated once again, she took the jet and turquoise skull from her bag and unwrapped it from the bundle of clothes she'd been keeping it in. She sat it on her lap and stared at it for a time. Its rictus grin stared back at her.
Is that you in my dreams?
She asked in a whisper. The skull continued to gaze at Achillea from empty eyes, and suddenly she felt silly. She rewrapped it and put it back in her bag, pulling out her spellbook instead. Then she began to study. As she still had both spells memorized from before, this time she read ahead into the labyrinth of arcane language that she herself had penned, but could not yet understand. She read the words anyway, willing them to make sense, but she was unable to do that either. Perhaps her creative and academic failures this morning could be blamed on the disturbing dream. A noise to her left indicated that Dureni had emerged from sleep. The older elf looked at her with puffy eyes and scratched his scalp.
Good morning,
He said.
Have you been up long?
Achillea closed her book and replaced it in her bag.
Just long enough to watch the sunrise. I suppose we should wake your brother.
Let him sleep a bit longer. He had a hard day yesterday.
The previous night, Tentir had explained to them that the sprites had cursed him so that he had tasted rotten fish.
But surely it won't last forever.
Achillea had remarked. Tentir had shared a grim smile with his brother before replying.
There's an elder in our tribe. Tulani is her name. Once, long ago, she accidentally killed a sprite, stepped on it while it was sleeping and crushed it, in fact. The other sprites then appeared and put a fairy hex on her, and it has lasted her whole life. It is still upon her to this day.
Was it the same hex they put on you?
Achillea had asked.
Worse, they caused her skin to smell like onions. It sounds harmless enough, right? Well, even though nobody in our tribe blamed her for what happened, she has always lived alone, and she has never found a mate.
While Tentir slept in, Achillea and Direni undressed and went into the river to bathe. Achillea couldn't help but wince when she saw the as-yet unhealed whip marks on Direni's back as he turned around. Despite these grim reminders of the dangers they'd faced, it felt glorious to wash off the grime of so many days' travel. Achillea even unbraided her hair so as to better clean it. The noise of their splashing around and laughing eventually woke Tentir, who joined them in the water, while Cord and Robin looked on from the bank. After they had washed and packed their things, they followed the river's eastern bank, heading north. By Achillea's calculation, they still had more than 2 weeks to go before they would reach their destination. It would be a long journey, but she had to admit that she felt optimistic, and she was so glad of the two brothers' companionship. She wouldn't have gotten this far without them, she knew, and she was grateful. The rain started once again sometime around noon. It was hard to tell the time of day with any accuracy, because by now the sky was completely overcast. Presently, the companions began to feel hungry. They decided that it would be best if they could save the small quantity of preserved rations they still carried and instead try to forage for something. There was a spot up ahead where the river had bulged and the vegetation was thicker. It seemed like a likely place to find some food. I've mentioned before that the rules I've been using for foraging while on the move afford players a 1 in 6 chance to find enough food to last a day. I think I can rule that, by a river, the chances would be higher, so I'll double those odds. That's a 1 or 2 on a d6 for success. Here's the roll. A 2. How about that? No wandering encounter for the day, and success at foraging? I'm almost ready to think the PC's luck has changed. It was Achillea who spotted it first, a little patch of white and yellow flowers, half hidden behind the bank of the river, just at the point where it bulged out. Although there were wildflowers all over the countryside, most of these plants could not be eaten. Happily, in this case, both of these were edible. It was an incredible stroke of luck.
Look,
She said brightly.
that's watercress. And those
Now she was pointing at the yellow flowers.
are coltsfoot.
The two plants, combined, made for a fresh-tasting, if light, lunch, and between them the companions ate the lot of it. While there wasn't anything left over after the meal to take with them, it was enough to fill their bellies for the day, and that was something to celebrate. As they rested, digesting, Direni patted his stomach and said,
Well spotted, Achillea. There's an old hunter's saying our friend Elmir is fond of repeating. Hunger sharpens the eye.
Achillea laughed, but Tentir remained silent.
Oh no.
Said Achillea, mistaking his discomfort for something it wasn't.
Does the food taste of rotted fish, like before?
No, it's not that.
It seemed like the younger brother wouldn't say more, but then he suddenly had a change of heart and opened up, sharing the story of his recent transgression with Achillea.
I'll have much to answer for when we get back,
He concluded. Achillea didn't know what to say about that, so she changed the subject.
Did you know
She began.
that coltsfoot flower can be dried to make a very tasty tea?
The brothers nodded with polite interest, but Achillea suddenly felt some worry of her own. For the second time in 2 days, she recollected the meeting with the wizard Fim, that tea he had served her. By her memory, it had tasted strange. Perhaps she only thought so, because she was not used to sweet tea. Achillea had never mentioned anything to the brothers about the Iron Tower or Fimgrim Atresh, and certainly not about her Vapi. But now she found herself wanting to tell Direni and Tentir everything. It was her turn to be honest and give a little more of herself, so she did. The brothers listened in silence as she unburdened herself, sharing every detail she could remember all the way to where she found her Vapi turned to stone. When she was done, there were tears running down her cheeks, and Cord, who had guessed at what she was talking about despite not speaking Elvish, was at her side with a wooden arm around her shoulder. The brothers didn't ask any questions. They just nodded and waited patiently until she was composed. Before long, Achillea sniffed, wiped her cheeks, and stood up.
I don't suppose either of you have ever heard of Fimgrim Atresh,
She said without much hope. Dureni and Tentir just shook their heads. Then there was nothing to do but put on their packs and resume the walk. Beyond the bulge, the river was wider. Achillea guessed that it might be 100 feet across. It seemed deeper, too. As it ran straighter, the current moved somewhat more swiftly. Miles went by as they hiked, keeping the river to their left and stopping whenever they required a break. A few hours before sunset, the clouds cleared and the intermittent rains finally abated. Their shadows began to lengthen, and then, just as the sun was completing its trek across the sky, Tentir, who was in the lead as usual, stopped to point at a shape in the distance. It was a little hard to tell what it was, partly because of the failing light, and partly because it was all the way on the other side of the river. It looked like a pile of rocks, but it did not fit with the rest of the landscape. Squinting, Tentir thought he could see individual stone bricks, and he shared this observation with the others.
That must be the ruins the Fey folk mentioned,
He said.
We haven't discussed it, but, well, I think we should take a look.
Achillea pulled at her chin.
What did that fairy say? That it was the location of a wizarding stick. Do you suppose there's any truth in that?
Oh yes,
Said Tentir.
sprites do not tell lies. Their race is incapable of telling lies, in fact.
Tentir speaks truth,
Agreed Dureni.
but they are also notorious tricksters, and although I doubt not the truth of their words, they may well have left out something important. You saw how they were acting.
Why don't we stop here for the night, and then, in the morning, we'll decide if we want to try and cross, and take a closer look.
Well, that brings us to the end of day 15, and to another set of hex crawl rolls for the night and the next day. Given that they would have had plenty of food and water today, I think the companions would have the energy and wherewithal to find a safe place with decent shelter a little ways off from the river's edge, where it's safer to spend the night. That means I can reduce the chance for a wandering encounter back down to a 1 in 3 chance. But first things first, a roll for tomorrow's weather. A 4. Oh boy, it looks like the rain is back, and it's worse now. No longer intermittent, sometime in the middle of the night, it recommences, and this time, there's no reprieve. The rain is cold, and the companion's clothing gets wet. Everyone must spend the pre-dawn hours shivering and unable to sleep. Next is a stumble-upon roll. Here we go. Well, look at that. I've got a 20. I thought I knew what the PCs were going to encounter on the next day, but this changes things. I'll need to come up with something new. A 20 means the PCs stumble upon some kind of boon. What might that be? Maybe my wandering encounter roll will provide a clue. Rolling a d6. A 3 on the die means no encounter. Maybe I can get an idea from my event meaning. Assist the innocent. Ah, yes, I know what's going to happen. Achillea is going to dream once again of the human boy tonight, but this one will be different. Thus far, she's been unable to communicate with him, but this stumble-upon roll has given me an idea of how that could change. Chapter 15. Part 3. Day 15. Midnight. Mythic event meaning. Assist the innocent. Party status. The party's status is unchanged. She was dreaming again, but this time the experience did not begin with any disorientation. She knew where she was and who she was. A quick look around through the eyes that were not her own, and she saw she was in the throne room once again, or perhaps still in the throne room. There was the dais and the pair of wooden thrones with the small goblet-bearing table between them. The boy looked away from the throne now and down at the floor. At his feet, a sun symbol had been etched into the stone.
It should be right here,
said the voice of the boy, sounding frustrated and scared. In the last dream, Achillea had been unable to communicate with him, but this time she had a plan. Achillea cast the spell, Message.
Tell me what you are looking for.
She said, telepathically, hoping her magic would still work in a dream. For the space of a heartbeat, there was no reply. Then,
You can hear me!
the boy sounded jubilant.
Thanks at all! I knew you could hear me. I just knew it. You are the fairy woman in the mirror, aren't you?
Achillea wanted to answer, but her spell was spent, and it only allowed for a single message.
Are you there, pretty fairy woman? I think you are. I can hear you near me.
The boy knelt down on the floor, and Achillea could sense the cold stone through the knees of his trousers. He traced the etching with a small finger.
I think this is where it is. I've only seen it in my dreams, but I think this is where.
Suddenly, he sounded worried.
You aren't just a dream, though, are you? Do you know what I think? I think you're a good spirit, and you've come to guide me home. And that's why you're here.
Achillea felt a deep sadness for this boy, even though she didn't even know what he was searching for. He seemed utterly alone here. She wished she could help him, even if all she could provide was a bit of comfort or reassurance. But what could she do? She wasn't even able to speak with him a second time.
Are you still there? I think you are still here. You are, aren't you?
He asked again. Achillea experienced the boy looking left and then right, as if to make sure there was no one else around. And now he was whispering.
I hope you are, because I want to tell you my secret. Do you promise to believe me?
If Achillea could have leaned forward, she would have.
Don't laugh, but my secret is... I think I might be dead.
Chapter 15, Part 4, Day 16. Morning. Mythic event meaning: assist the innocent. Party status: Achillea, 7 of 7 hit points. Cord, 5 of 11, having gained 1 hit point through natural healing. Dureni, 9 of 9. Tentir, 6 of 6. Supplies: the companions have 5 portions of food and 21 of water. Spells available: Achillea has memorized Message ×2. Cord can cast Entangle and Locate plants and animals. In the morning, the cold rains came harder, making them shiver. After she had studied, taking pains to memorize her spell of Message twice, and to keep her precious spellbook under shelter, Achillea told the others about her visions of the human boy, and how she suspected they were more than mere dreams. Dureni, judging by the look on his face as he listened, was not much moved, but Tentir showed great interest and asked her a lot of questions. Unfortunately, Achillea had no answer for most of them. While nobody knew what to say about her dreams, there was consensus on what they should do that morning. They decided to try a river crossing. Before that, they ate most of their remaining rations. This would lighten their load and prevent it from getting wet as they swam. They further dumped out the contents of their water skins, also for the purpose of reducing their burden. These could be refilled on the far side. When these preparations were complete, they removed those items from their packs that most needed to be kept dry and held them aloft as they entered the water. The river was cold, but the rain had already given them a chill, and it felt good once they got used to it. Achillea, Dureni, and Tentir were all fair swimmers. Cord could not swim, but he did have a natural talent for staying afloat. Making things even easier, the current here was not so strong, and so, in crossing, the companions only drifted downriver by 30 or 40 yards. When they reached the other side, Achillea helped Cord out of the water and up the far bank. She and the elven brothers wrung out their clothes as best they could, dressed, refilled their water skins, and then began to walk north again along the river's west bank. It was surprising how much weight a full water skin added to their load, each of them thought privately. When she had pulled Cord up on the bank, Achillea had noticed again how well the construct was healing. The split down his torso was still there, but it was starting to fill up with new wood. The result was that it was now slightly wider on top than on the bottom. She had also caught something she had never seen on him before. There was a tiny green sprout growing out from the middle of the wound. When she asked him about it, Cord just shrugged. The companion's next task was to investigate the jumble of stone blocks Tentir had seen on the previous day. There wasn't much to discover, it turned out. Tentir had been right that the stones had been cut, and that this was indeed the ruin of an ancient building. Most of the blocks had crumbled. Age and weather had rounded their edges. However, a few of them yet retained their rectangular shape. As the earth had reclaimed so much of the structure, it was impossible to tell from the outside what kind of building it had been. But when they drew close, and Achillea saw inside, the half-elf blurted out,
Of course, I should have guessed.
She pointed out a huge round stone cut into a cylinder, sitting right in the middle of the ruin.
A building, right near the river. This must have been a mill house.
Elves did not use mills to grind anything. In their culture, all such work was done by hand. It took a while for Achillea to explain how water mills worked. She showed them where a central wooden pole would have once gone through the middle of the millstone, and, asking them to use their imaginations, described how a second pole would have been connected to it, using gears, to a water wheel outside. The engineering concept delighted the brothers, who had only ever heard stories about human ingenuity and invention.
Amazing,
said Tentir.
Imagine how much flour this could make, and how much bread. Well, it could have fed dozens of people.
Hundreds.
Achillea corrected him.
My master Oldve once told me that when they don't have access to water, humans can harness the wind in much the same way.
Durrani scowled at that in incredulity.
Nonsense.
He said flatly.
Anyone can see that no amount of wind could ever move that.
Achillea followed his gaze back to the big millstone, and she had to agree that it did seem pretty unlikely.
All the same,
She continued.
if this place was able to feed a lot of people, then...
There might have been a whole village here,
said Tentir, finishing her thought.
Well, I would not have expected to find a treasure such as the Fey folk described in a water will.
mill.
Achillea corrected. Durrani ignored her.
But if there is a bigger ruin, it would probably be fairly nearby.
His sentence trailed off as he noticed something in the distance to the west.
Look.
He breathed. The others turned and immediately saw what he saw. A half-mile away, on the side of a small hill, with its source hidden by a copse of trees, a thin gray ribbon of smoke was slowly rising into the sky. Thanks very much for listening to Tale of the Manticore. If you're enjoying the show and would like to help to support it, there are lots of ways to do so. You can recommend the show online or to friends. You can like and repost episode announcements on social media. You can pick up one of my offerings on DriveThruRPG. You can purchase a Tale of the Manticore t-shirt at www.beararts.store. And finally, you can rate or review the show on your podcatcher of choice. I am so grateful for all of your support. This episode ran a little bit long, so I'll skip the review read and jump to the credits. To my amazing cast, Sid, my amigo in Arizona, playing the sprite leader and providing me with one of the most fun episodes I've ever gotten to mix. The fantastic Truman Cooper, who voices the ghost of the prince. Kyellen and Kevin in their roles of Durrani and Tentir, who always deliver. Thank you so very much. Your voices bring this show alive. For listeners who'd like to learn a bit more about Tale of the Manticore, I keep a blog where I post all kinds of show and RPG-related stuff, like art, maps, tables, crafts, and show notes. You can find it at taleofthemanticore.blogspot.com. To get in touch with me, I'm at ManticoreTale on X, Tale of the Manticore Podcast on Instagram, or taleofthemanticore@gmail.com. I reply to all the messages and email I receive, and I'd love to hear from you. The adventure will continue on the next episode of Tale of the Manticore. It's the story where chaos rules.